Okay, that's live on Facebook and YouTube. And now I've got to pull up Instagram. There we go. And now I've got to let my peeps know that I'm here. So we got a doozy today, but what else is there? When do I not have a doozy? Okay, when does that happen? When is the lack of dooziness? So, as always, for those of you that are seeing me for the first time, for those of you that have never seen me before, or you're joining me live for the first time, every week I come out here, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on a Friday, and I talk about what superhero stories or what happened in fandom this week that caught my attention. So, excuse me, every week is something different, I know, and every week it's it could be a bunch of different stories. So hold on, let me mute my camera for a second. Okay, there we go. So every week is something different. And so I don't cover everything in fandom because it's too much to cover. And I don't cover everything in fandom because I'm not interested in a lot of it. So I just talk about stuff that I'm interested in. So what I'm going to talk about this week, because I know there's a lot of stuff that happened this week. Most of the buzz this week has been around Tron Ares and what that means for the future and what that means specifically for Jared Leto and a whole bunch of stuff. But there's just, a plethora of videos out about that. And I didn't see the film, and I'm not really interested in seeing the film. So what I'm going to talk about today is a discussion that started yesterday. So I thought I'd do my live stream on it. That is, what is a superhero? What is a superhero? Now, before I get into it, before I get into specifics, we have to lay some kind of groundwork. So first thing I want to say is that, everybody's going to have their own definition. Now, one of the things that is always easier when you're trying to have a discussion is if we all have common terms. But when it comes to this kind of topic, when we say the word superhero, we don't all mean the same thing by it. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about my personal definition, and I'm going to talk about some historical accuracy in terms of what we would call superhero development. And everybody's going to have their own take on it, and that's fine. I'm going to come with my opinion and some facts. Okay? So what I want to start out by saying is that glitch keeps coming up. I wonder why my stuff keeps glitching like that. That's freaky. Anyway, so I want to start off by saying my definition of a superhero. So let me make that clear. A superhero, to me, has a dual identity and a secret identity. They have extra abilities, gifts, or trainings. They have enhanced tech. They have costumes. They have capes. And they're dedicated to doing good. Now, before I even get out the gate, I know what people are going to say. That doesn't apply to all of them. That's right. So what I mean is they all have at least some of that. But normally, I count someone as a superhero that has more of that than not. Okay, so let me read that list for you again. Dual identity, secret identity, extra abilities, gifts, or trainings, enhanced tech, costumes, capes dedicated to doing good. That does not apply equally across the board to everything we might call a superhero. So when I say superhero, I mean a character that has a preponderance of that, not just one or two, but they have more of that than not. That's just my definition. And for example, the Fantastic Four don't wear masks. For example, Iron Man doesn't have special powers. So they have a preponderance of that. So they may not have all of that, but they have most of it. The weight of what qualifies in my eyes is, do you have most to all of that? Not one of those, and then you say that's a superhero. That's just my definition. Other people are going to have their own definitions, but that's cool. So I'm going to read that list for you one more time. And again, keep this in mind as we talk. A dual identity, secret identity, extra abilities, gifts, or trainings, enhanced tech, costumes, capes, dedicated to doing good. Okay? The Fantastic Four does not have all of those. Fantastic Four has most of those. That's why I count them as superheroes. So if you have a preponderance on that list, that's my personal definition. I know everybody's not going to agree with that, and that's cool. That's just the way I see it. So that being the case, that leads me into this tweet that I made yesterday that once again set off a firestorm, because when does that not happen? So I said this right here. I said, it's long been a discussion among fans as to who the first superhero was. So that's why the first thing that I wanted to define was what I mean by superhero. Then I listed the top 3 contenders before Superman, but there's actually much more than that. I just listed, pay attention to what I'm saying. I just listed the ones that most people would know about or think about or refer to, but they're not actually the only heroes before Superman. The reason that I say that Superman is the first superhero is because all of the stuff that I named on the list, the dual identity, the secret identity, the extra abilities, gifts, or trainings, enhanced tech, costumes, capes dedicated to doing good. I forgot one. Special origin. Yeah, I forgot one. So let me go over that list again. Dual identity, secret identity, extra abilities, gifts, or trainings, enhanced tech, costumes, capes, dedicated to doing good, and a special origin. So I said that Superman is the one that started it all. What I think some people heard me say was that he was the first to do it, and that's not true. And I'm going to show today how that's not true, but that's not what I was saying. What I meant by what I said was that it was all codified and tropified and solidified in Superman. When you think of superheroes, unless you are a comics historian, when you think of all the tropes that belong to superheroes, and those are the 8 I just read, you will tend to trace it all the way back to Superman, because Superman is not the first hero to do any of those things. He's the one where it all came together and became solidified, codified, and tropified in people's minds. So that's what I mean when I say he's first. I mean, when it comes to Superman, all of that stuff I just read, it's stuck. Not he's the only one to do it. Not he's the first one to do it. Not if you don't have every one, you don't qualify as a superhero, because that's what people keep tripping on. And then, if we have time, I'll go into it. What up, Scare? Good to see you. Remember, if you're here, leave me some comments. I'll read the comments at the end. So keep your comments coming, because I love them. So when I get to talking, I'm going to go through your comments. So definitely leave some comments as I talk. So many times people make the argument about the difference between a superhero and a vigilante. And then there are superheroes and there's anti-heroes. And then there's a lot of different things. So there's a lot of different things we can get into. Maybe I'll touch on some of that. But what I want to talk about today, again, is more historical and more of my own definition. I just wanted to clarify because, on Twitter, people think that you're supposed to write a dissertation. I'm not laughing. People think they talk to you like you have to write a dissertation to defend your hypothesis, to defend your theorem, which always amazes me. And another thing that amazes me about Twitter in particular is that if folks don't know what they're talking about, and you know that they don't know what they're talking about, then they're going to get mad at you. I'm not laughing. I'm trying not to laugh. I'm really trying not to laugh. Yes, this is the Captain Marvel shirt I have on. Classic Captain Marvel. So, again, the expectation is that you have to write like this long dissertation to try to defend your, you can't just throw out a comment, and then also if they don't know what they're talking about and you know that they don't know what they're talking about, they're going to get mad at you, which is just amazing to me. That whole thing just makes me laugh. So that's why I said the groundwork I have to lay today is my definition of a superhero and why I count Superman as the first one, because I did not mean, nor did I say, that he was the only one to do these things, nor is he historically the first one to do these things. And that's not what I was trying to say. I was trying to say when it comes to Kal-El of Krypton, he's the one that made it all stick. When we think of costume superheroes and we think of all the tropes, we think of the stuff I just named, dual identity, secret identity, those aren't the same things. A dual identity and a secret identity is not the same thing. Okay? Dual identity, secret identity, extra abilities, gifts or trainings, enhanced tech, costumes, capes, dedicated to doing good, and special origin. Superman is the one in Western literature that made all of that stick. And he's the one that people think of when you trace back your earliest memories of what you think a superhero might be. It always comes back to him. That's what I meant by what I said. Because he's not the first to do any of what he did. And we're going to see that today. There are other, I like that, age of ease access information, people still tripping, so true. It's like they don't have a Googler. Do you have a Googler? I have a Googler, but anyway. So as we're going to see today, the origins of what we would call superheroes, or what, now a friend of mine, Shadewing, Steve Sellers, said yesterday, and I liked his phraseology, that's why I'm using it here. He said, there's a through line of evolution when it comes to superheroes. I agree completely. I agree that they did not develop all at once. They didn't happen all at once. That there's a through line of development. What's funny, though, is that even certain comic historians don't agree on who was first. So I'm going to talk about some stuff chronologically, because each event, each character, each situation fed more and more into developing the tropes that will come to be the costume heroes that we recognize, that we think of when we say superheroes. And some of the original earlier superheroes, we might not consider them superheroes today. That's why I mentioned the flamboyant costumes, the capes, the dual identity, because that's what it's come to mean to normies in particular. And Superman is the one that made all that stuff stick. Okay? So let me pull my tweet back up. So I said, it's long been in discussion. Among fans is who the first superhero was. Top 3 contenders before Superman are. Now, before I go into this, let me say, I did not say that these were the only superheroes, because we're going to see that that's not correct. And I did not say that these were the first ones, because that's not correct either. That's not what I said. What I said was, and what I meant by what I said, is that these are the ones that will probably stick out in people's minds the most. Because most people are not comics historians. So they kind of go by what jumps out in their mind. So most people will think about The Shadow, created by Street and Smith Publishers and Walter B. Gibson. Shadow debuted on July 31st, 1930. The Shadow started out as a mysterious narrator of a radio program, Detective Story Hour, created to boost sales of Street and Smith's monthly pulp detective story magazine. So The Shadow did not start out as a print character. The Shadow started out as a voice on a radio program that quickly became so popular. People started asking them, where is the book that features this character? That's how The Shadow came about. If you're not familiar with what The Shadow looks like, that's him right there. And he had a catchphrase, "The Shadow knows." That's The Shadow, 1930. Okay? And his catchphrase was, "Who knows what evil lurks in the heart of men? The Shadow knows." And then he had that sinister laugh. Okay? So The Shadow's first issue of the pulp series, The Shadow magazine, went on sale on April 1st, 1931. The Shadow has many of those elements that I listed, because he's got that costume, because he's got that dual identity. Now, what are the Shadow's powers? He possesses the ability to cloud men's minds to become invisible, and has a mastery of the mystic arts. Okay. He can cloud your mind. He can turn invisible, and has a mastery of the mystic arts. So we can all think of heroes that have those qualities. Martian Manhunter, Sue Storm, Doctor Strange, Wanda Maximoff. And then also, if you notice from the movie, from the Alec Baldwin movie, you notice his face changes when he powers up. So when he goes from his civilian identity to actually becoming the Shadow, his actual face changes, so you can't see that's him. That's what I mean about the dual identity and the secret identity. Okay? And so he, like I said, went from radio to the pulp magazine. That was in 1930. But he's not first, but he's probably one of the ones that people would think of, because he came out before Superman. Now, there's another one I need to mention that I did not put in the tweet, but I'm going to mention it now. And that other one is Doc Savage. So let me put him on the screen while I'm talking. Doc Savage. There he goes. Okay, now, Doc Savage dropped in 1933 originally. Real name was Clark Savage Jr. He was a polymathic scientist, an explorer, a detective, and a warrior who rights wrongs and punishes evildoers. So by my definition, he probably is closer to an action adventurer, but he's definitely heroic. So he can slide in under superhero by having most of those, I think. He feels a little bit more like Tarzan, or more like an action adventurer to me than a superhero, but could be wrong. So he got trained by a team of scientists that trained his mind and body to near superhuman abilities, giving him great strength, endurance, photographic memory, master of the martial arts, vast knowledge of the sciences. He's also a master of disguise, excellent imitator of voices, a physician, scientist, adventure detective, inventor, explorer, researcher, and also a musician. So we're kind of getting into Batman's territory here with Doc Savage. Also, Stan Lee said that he thought that Doc Savage was probably the forerunner to modern superheroes. So Doc Savage has a combination of elements. Okay. He's still not the one that people would think of when you come to superheroes, even though he came out before Superman. Okay. And Superman straight up stole the Fortress of Solitude from Doc Savage, if you didn't know that. The Fortress of Solitude did not originate with Superman. Doc Savage had a Fortress of Solitude. Yes, he did. So he's even closer, I think, and his nickname is the Man of Bronze. So he's even closer, perhaps, than the Shadow, but he has a different combination of the elements that I mentioned. So you can already see just from these first two that there's an evolution going on here. There's a progression going on here. Okay. Next one up, I said Mandrake the Magician. Now, let me put Mandrake on the screen. Okay. So Mandrake the Magician dropped in 1934. He's created by Lee Falk. Remember that name. So he dropped in 1934, and he's got hypnotic techniques. He can create illusions. He can hypnotize people's minds. He eventually demonstrates other powers like shape-shifting, becoming invisible, levitation, and teleportation. Also, his hat, cloak, and wand passed down from his father also has magical properties that Mandrake learns how to manipulate. Okay, so here comes a dual identity. He works on stage as an actual stage magician for a living, but he spends most of his time fighting criminals, regular and supernatural. Mandrake lives in Xanadu, a high-tech mansion on top of a mountain in New York State. Okay? And another thing that's notable about Mandrake is that he also features what many consider to be the first Black superhero. And the first Black superhero is found. I'm going to pull the picture up so you can see it. There we go. So the first Black superhero is considered by many historians to be Lothar. And there he is. Okay. So Lothar was a companion to Mandrake. And they had adventures together. And a lot of people, a lot of comics historians count Lothar as the first Black superhero in print. Okay. Now, next up, I also talked about the Phantom. Now, the Phantom is huge. You should know the Phantom. You should be quite familiar with him. Okay, but if not, let me put a picture up of him. As I talk about him, the Phantom was also created by Lee Falk, same dude that created Mandrake. Okay, he operates from the fictional country of Bengala in Africa. Okay, he dropped in 1936 in a comic strip for the newspaper. Okay. Now, originally, this changed later, but originally he didn't have any metahuman powers. So he was tall, Olympic caliber athlete, master of combat, a peak level speed, reflexes, and balance, and all that, and a skilled fighter. He's also a skilled marksman. So once again, very much in the Batman territory and original Captain America. A lot of people don't know that Captain America in the MCU is enhanced. He's got metahuman abilities from the super soldier formula. Captain America originally in the comics was peak human. So he was a maximized version of what a human being could become at the peak of human development. That was originally the idea behind the super soldier serum for Captain America. But in the movies in particular, he became superhuman. So that's a different level. That's a different thing. Okay. So the Phantom, a lot like Batman, depends on his physical training, his combat training, his marksman training, but also his reputation is the ghost who walks. So there we have the same kind of element with Batman, that mystery element to where you're not sure if he's a man or something else. And also the thing that Batman uses to make people afraid of him before he comes in the room. See, that Batman wasn't the first character to do that. The Phantom did that also. The reason that the Phantom had a myth of supernatural nature surrounding him is because the mantle would be passed down from father to son. So it made it look like the Phantom never went away. So if the Phantom fought certain villains in his lifetime, then when the next generation comes, there's still a Phantom. So it made it look like it was the same guy. It wasn't the same guy. It was his son, all grown up. But that's another way they perpetuated the myth of the Phantom being more than a man. So that did not start with Batman. You see that? Now, the color purple on the newspaper strips, the Phantom was originally gray, but the publisher thought purple would pop out more because Lee Falk's original scheme was gray. He turned it purple because he thought that would make the Phantom jump out more. You see that? So once again, I wasn't saying, and I'm not saying that, Superman or Batman or anybody in that era was the first to do any of this, because they weren't. What I'm saying is that the ones I mentioned, the Shadow, Mandrake, Doc Savage, and the Phantom are most likely the ones that people would think of. Okay? So again, especially non-comics historians, but some comics historians give credit to those four. Okay, now we're going to go into some historical accuracy in terms of who was actually first. And again, it depends on your definition of superheroes. That's why I spent so much time at the top of the broadcast talking about that. Okay. So I know so many people are about drama. I know that so many of the stuff is about drama, but I'm about education. Okay. I know some people just want to see the fight and the argue and the confusion and all that. And I'm not operating in no spirit of confusion. That's not me. I'm about education. What's the truth? I tell you that every week. What's the truth? Okay. Truth is not subjective. Neither are facts. Opinions and perspectives are subjective. Okay. So now we're going to get into some historical accuracy about who was actually first. And so a lot of people count the actual first superhero as a character named the Boy Wonder Hugo Hercules. Okay. Hugo Hercules, and there he is. Hugo Hercules came out with a comic strip, and that was all the way back in 1902. 1902 is when Hugo dropped in a comic strip. Okay? And so a lot of people, comics historians, count him as the first hero. He was in a weekly comic strip in the Chicago Tribune, written by Wilhelm Körner. Ran for 5 months, 1902 to 1903, September to January, 17 strips. This is considered the earliest superhero fiction comic. He's a good-natured man endowed with superhuman strength. Okay? But he also got into Superman level strength, lifting elephants, trains, kicking houses like they were footballs, all that. So even though this strip was not highly successful, A lot of people consider him to be first. Okay. Now we have to get into the next one, which I know is going to be mind-blowing for a lot of people. And that is this one. That is the Scarlet Pimpernel. Oh, let me make it smaller so you can see that. The Scarlet Pimpernel. If you don't know anything about the Scarlet Pimpernel, then let me tell you about that. The Scarlet Pimpernel actually comes from a play that was written by a woman, Baroness Orczy. I don't know if I'm saying her name right, Orczy. So the Scarlet Pimpernel comes from the stage play of the same title that she co-authored with her husband, Montague Barstow. And it comes from historical fiction novels that were written after her stage play hit. But the significant things to know about the Scarlet Pimpernel is that the idea is that they're a daring hero who cultivated a secret identity disguised by a meek or ineffectual other persona. So who adopted that idea? Zorro, the Shadow, the Spider, the Green Hornet, Phantom, Superman, and Batman followed with that trope. That trope actually started with the Scarlet Pimpernel. Stan Lee also said of the Scarlet Pimpernel that he thought that was the first superhero. So technically, if that's true, the first superhero was written by a woman from her novels and the play that she wrote. So the title character transforms himself into a formidable swordsman and a quick-thinking escape artist, established a hero with a secret identity in popular culture. And so other people picked it up. Again, Zorro, the Shadow, Superman, Batman. But the Scarlet Pimpernel is the one that really kind of created and put that trope in the forefront. Scarlet Pimpernel came out in 1903. So if we're going to be technical about the first superheroes, we got to give it to Hugo, the Boy Wonder. Hugo Hercules, the Boy Wonder. And we got to give it to the Scarlet Pimpernel if we're going to be technical about who was first. Okay? Now that was the turn of the century, 1900. In the 1910s, there were a bunch of other heroes that came out. The Scarecrow, Dr. Sin, Nightalope, Leo St. Clair. Nightalope, I don't know if I'm saying that right, so correct me if I'm wrong. The Warlord of Mars, John Carter, you know him, he was in 1911. Tarzan the Ape Man, 1912. Nightwind, 1913. The Gray Seal, 1914. Masked Marvel, 1915. The Masked Rider, 1919. And Zorro, also 1919. All of those predate Superman and Batman. All of them. See that? So there's more, so I'm not going to read the whole list, but I just want you to understand what I was saying. Superman is not the first to do or invent any of the tropes that he's known for. I just showed you where they come from. Superman is the first character that made them stick. So that's why in the minds of most normies and some comics historians, they consider Superman to be the first to combine all of it, the foppish civilian identity, to hide the brave and heroic superhero identity, the secret identity, meaning that nobody knew that was him, the flamboyant costume, the cape, the shield, the powers, the metahuman powers, the unique origin, and being a do-gooder, all that. All that was crystallized as Superman, but he wasn't the first to do any of that. Neither was Batman. Batman, in fact, was created as a response to Superman, if you didn't know that. They told Bob Kane they wanted another character that was going to hit like Superman did, and we know about Bob Kane. And Bill Finger is the one that actually made Batman the Batman that we know. Okay. Also, Captain Marvel, Shazam, is a response to Superman. They said they wanted another hero on that level, but different from Superman. So that's another reason why most people count Superman as first, because so many of the heroes that came after him were in response to him. Not the Shadow, not Doc Savage, not Mandrake, okay? Not the Scarlet Pimpernel, none of that. Superman is who most of those characters that came in the Golden Age were kind of a response to him, not the Phantom. So the Phantom is the closest to the Batman archetype, and the Scarlet Pimpernel is the one that's closest to letting people think you're an idiot in your real life because you're trying to hide the fact that you're a super vigilante or super trained or something in your other life. These are facts. These are not my opinions. This is historical data. So once again, I just want to be clear about what it was that I was saying, that most normies are going to trace it all back to Superman because so many of the characters that came after Superman were in direct response to him because he hit. And of course, if something is published and it hits, of course, people are going to emulate it. When has that ever been any different? But like I said, Batman is a direct response to Superman. Captain Marvel, Shazam is a direct response to Superman. But if we're going to give it to first, way back at the turn of the century, we have to give it to Hugo Hercules and the Scarlet Pimpernel because they're the ones. And then there's, like I said, there's a whole bunch after them. Let me just read you the next decade before we get to the 30s, because the 30s obviously is when Superman and Batman and all that popped off. Flash Gordon, Mandrake and all that. So the 30s is really when it popped off, but the 30s is not when it started. So like my friend Shadewing Steve Sellers said, it was a through line of evolution. It was a progression. The 30s, again, is when it started. The 30s is when it popped off, but the 30s is not when it started. It started in the 1900s. So in the 1910s, I read you that. Let me read you the 1920s. The Red Shadow. Buck Rogers is from the 1920s. Patora Zoo, I think I'm saying that right. Popeye is from the 1920s. So it's in the 30s where everything that we would trace back really began to pop off. Because in the 30s, we got the Shadow, the Golden Bat, Dick Tracy, Shandy the Magician, Conan, Lone Ranger, Tonto, Doc Savage, Flash Gordon, Mandrake, Lothar, Green Hornet, Kato, Phantom, Domino Later, Girl with the X-ray eyes, Avenger, Superman, Batman, all that. We got Zatara, Zatanna's father, Namor, all that. So all that was the 30s. That's when it all popped off, but that's not all when it started. So I think I've demonstrated that. So just wanted to make that clear. Because all this, what I've said today, I don't, not writing this kind of dissertation on Twitter. So that's why I wanted to do a live stream about it. Okay. All right. Well, I know some folks is probably expecting more drama, but I'm not about the drama. A lot of people love to argue. I'm having discussions. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to be educational. I'm trying to be factual because facts are not subjective. All that what I read to you don't have nothing to do with me. It's not true because I said it. My opinion is what I believe. Facts are not true because I said them. So all the people that want to argue with history. I just showed you history. Boom. Okay. Scarif says, I've called out so many different accounts claiming one thing when I know it's the exact opposite. And for some reason, they didn't follow me because they didn't want to hear the truth, I guess. Whoa, Lord. Story of my life. A story of my life on Twitter or whatever. And so, people just get really livid. They just get, and they take it personally. And I'm like, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I try to look up some facts. I try to find out some foundation for what I'm saying, but if I'm wrong, I'm just wrong. That's cool. Not a crime to be wrong. Everybody's wrong sometimes. But it seems like some people take that so personally, and some people get so livid, and some people kind of, their goal seems to be to want to try to prove you wrong, not to have a discussion. So whatever. And Scuttlebutt also says, amazing in this age of easily accessed information, people still tripping. That's right. That's right, because they do. Do you have a Googler? I think you should have a Googler. I think a Googler is good for you because it helps you see. Like a lot of people don't know that Captain Marvel at one point outsold Superman. Captain Marvel, Shazam, who they call Shazam now, which I hate because that is not his name. His name is Captain Marvel. Shazam is the wizard that granted Billy Batson those powers. But anyway, when he was in print, he outsold Superman, and Captain Marvel was also, I told you this last week, the first one to get a movie serial. Out of all of them, Captain Marvel was first in live action in terms of the movie serial. He really was. Okay? Cajun's here. Cajun says, Standum is one fan. Perfect. That right there, my friends, is a perfect statement. That's perfect. Put that on Twitter, Cajun, so I can retweet that. Standum has ruined fandom. That is perfectly said. That's right. Now, for long-time comic readers or normies, you may not know what is meant by the word stand or standum. And however it started out, what it means now in practicality is someone that is obsessed and dedicated with a character or a particular ship or a particular director. They're obsessed with that character, with a particular relationship, or with a director. However, stands started out, that's what it means now in practical application. They're obsessed. Like I had a conversation with someone about Catwoman, and they kept trying to make Catwoman a victim, and they kept trying, and she can't control her feelings, blah, blah, blah. So I went back to her first appearance, because Catwoman's first appearance is Batman #1. Selina Kyle has been around as long as Batman has. And Selina Kyle is a thief. And the combination of chemistry between Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle has always been based on the chase. Because they get turned on by the wrongness of being together, about being on different sides of the law, although Batman is a criminal too, which is his biggest weakness. Batman and Superman have the same biggest moral weakness, and that is that Captain America has it too. They think that their version of right is absolutely right. So that's why I keep telling you that people keep saying that Superman or these characters are boring. They just don't know. They don't know what they're talking about. Superman, Batman, and Captain America all think that their version of right is absolutely right. So Batman gets mad at other people fighting crime that don't fight crime like he does, because somehow it escapes him that he's a costume vigilante working outside of the law most of the time. Yes, he works with Gordon, but that's because Gordon gives him free reign. And yes, many times the government works with Superman because Superman would fight threats that we could not otherwise counter. That's why they allowed the Justice League to operate. So there are points in time across comic history where sometimes they become deputized, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they work with government agencies, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just straight up vigilantes. But Batman, Superman, and Captain America all believe that their version of right is absolute right. And so if you don't see it the way they see it, then it's going to be an issue, which is all three of them's greatest weakness if you didn't know that. So that's why I don't listen to people talk about these characters are boring. No, they're not. You just don't know them. You just don't understand them. Superman has plenty of weaknesses. Superman has plenty of stories where you can take an angle to make the story interesting, even without nerfing him, without making him less that he is power-wise. Because I noticed, because I'm doing a rewatch of Justice League, I noticed that he almost never uses freeze breath. Superman uses flight, and he uses super strength, and he uses heat vision the most. I do not claim that he has invulnerability in the Justice League cartoon or in his own animated series, because every punch, every blow, every ray gun knocks him out. So he's not invulnerable in those iterations. He's tougher than a human. That is not the same as invulnerability, where you can't be hurt. So those are just different degrees. So yeah, when we're dealing with stands, we're dealing with people that have fallen in love with and obsessed with certain characters, certain ships, or certain directors. But that's to the exclusion of anything else. That's to the exclusion of any information, any perspective, any facts to the contrary of what they believe and what they want. I love superheroes, and been reading them since I was 4 years old. Y'all know my story. I love them, but just because I love Batman doesn't mean I know everything about him. It doesn't mean my perspective about him is right about everything. It's just my perspective. Okay? So I put a hot take on sometime this morning that I always thought Bane was overrated because Bane originally made Batman run a gauntlet, and Bruce had to fight every foe that was available, and he fought him for a week or two, and he was tired, more tired than he's ever been. Then Bane comes out with the super reward itself and so-called breaks the bat, and I called chicken scratch on that whole thing. That wasn't a toe-to-toe fight. Sure, you can beat somebody when they're exhausted. Is that the way they fight in the ring? I'm not talking about later on. I'm talking about when we start the fight. When we ring the bell in a boxing match, both fighters are supposed to be rested. Now, if they're not, that's one of them's fault, but they have a chance to rest up and prepare for the fight, don't they? Then they fight toe-to-toe. Now, if one of them gets tired later on, he'll probably lose. But you have a chance to come to the ring on equal footing with your opponent when you box. Is that right or wrong? So Bane setting Bruce up to run a gauntlet to fight until he can't focus, until he's tired. And then here comes Bane, and Bane is also roided out. So he's not in Batman's weight class because of the venom, because of the steroids. And now all of a sudden he breaks the bat. Whatever. So Bruce comes back from that, of course, but also we get Azrael Bats in the midst of Nightfall, which he's another controversial character. I liked him. And the reason I liked him was because one of the things about good writing is when you show another character that took the same path as your main character, but then they deviate. So Azrael Bats is Bruce Wayne without the moral restraint, without the no-kill rule. Azrael Bats is more, like what it becomes later, more an instrument of complete vengeance than the Batman concept, which is to scare criminals. Hurt them, yes. Lock them up, yes. To scare them. The reason Bruce adopted the Bat motif was to scare them before he fought them, to make them think that crime doesn't pay. To punish them, yes, but not to the point of death. Now, that no-kill rule evolves. We know that too. But Azrael Bats didn't care about none of that. He's like, I'm Batman, and you're going down, even if I have to slice you in the ribbons. So I like that. Okay? Popcorn Fart says it makes sense, though, because Bane is a villain. I agree, by the way. I think Bane is overrated. Yeah. Well, cheating is not the right word. It's kind of underhanded, kind of dirty, but that's right. That's apropos for a villain. That's right. I'm just saying it's not a toe-to-toe fight. So, he broke the bat and all this different kind of stuff. It wasn't a toe-to-toe fight. It was after 14 rounds. So it's like Rocky fighting Drago, except Rocky gets in the ring after 14 rounds of fighting somebody else. When Rocky and Drago fought in Rocky IV, they both got in the ring fresh. What if Rocky had gotten in the ring and he'd already gone 14 rounds with somebody else before he faced Drago? What would have happened? Drago would have killed him like he killed Apollo. That is the first Batman and Bane fight. 14 rounds with all these other people then here you come on steroids. So that's why I said, I just think Bane is overrated because he's got to juice up, and it wasn't toe to toe, and it wasn't an honorable fight. So I agree, he's a villain, so of course he's going to do dirty, underhanded stuff, but still overrated as far as I'm concerned. Go toe to toe, then we can have that conversation. Go toe to toe. When we did the Marvel DC crossover, Batman and Captain America went toe to toe, and they ended up not fighting because Batman said, you could probably take me down with time, because they sized each other up. And even though Cap is a super soldier and Batman is not, Batman could hold his own, but he said Cap would probably eventually take him down. I see what you're saying. Your beef is people's perception of Bane is whack because they're going off the Nolan movie. Right. And that goes back to what Cajun said about stand-up. Because often, not always, but often it's people that have consumed 1 to 2 pieces of content. And then all of a sudden they present as an expert on the subject, as if that's why last week, remember my video last week? It was called You're Jumping On Point. That's why I did that video. Because the younger you are and the longer your favorite hero or ship has been around, the less exposure you have to them. You have consumed the least amount of content in your lifetime the younger you are. Nothing wrong with that. And I'm not bashing younger people at all. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say if the character has been around longer than you've been alive, you have a jumping on point. You have a point where you started watching the cartoons, you started reading the books, you started watching the movies. But instead of just being a fan, you become a stan, and then you get all crazy with your obsession over one particular iteration. Like you've heard me criticize Batman 89 many times because Batman 89 is so wrong. And some of the stuff that happened in Batman 89 got introduced in the comics because that's what happens. They change stuff in different mediums and then all of a sudden they incorporate it in the comics canon. But if that's your first time seeing that character, then you think that's the way it happened. So let's do 2 quick examples of that with Batman. First example, well, 3. First one is the Joker did not kill the Waynes. That is unique to Batman 1989. It was actually Joe Chill. At first it was random because the pain was that Bruce lost his parents just for robbery for no reason. Then it became a mob hit. That's later on. The Joker, Jack Napier in Batman 89, did not kill the Waynes. That's unique to that movie, number 1. Number 2, Batman did not drop the Joker in Nevada Chemicals. In the comics, the Joker was the original Red Hood. So you don't see the Joker as the Red Hood persona. Because the Joker was the Red Hood, his face was completely covered by that red mask. He was breaking into this chemical factory, and Joker's goal was to steal $1 million because he was a disgruntled employee that knew he wasn't going to make enough money to retire. So he decided to steal $1 million so he could retire off that. Now, this is back in the 1930s, so $1 million retirement. So Joker created the Red Hood persona so his face wouldn't be seen. And he had got to his last crime to get the money that he needed. Batman busts in the Ace Chemical Factory, and Joker, in an attempt to escape him, jumps into the chemicals, swims through them. When he gets back home and takes off his hood, he discovers that his skin is pale white, his hair is turned green, and his lips are rouge red. Then he thought that was funny. He thought life had played a joke on him, and that's how he became the Joker. Not in the way it happened in Batman 89. There's no Red Hood in Batman 89. Batman did not drop him in the chemicals. In the comic books, Joker dived of his own volition, trying to get away from Batman. Okay, and the third one I'll bring up, not from Batman 89. Third one I will bring up is Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn originated in Batman the Animated Series. She's not in the comics originally. But she was such a popular character and so well done in the animated series that they brought her into DC continuity. Now, they've ruined her since then, but that's another conversation. Okay, so let's do another example right quick. Who only exists in certain iterations of a character? Smallville is good for that. If Smallville was your first introduction to Superman and you never read a Superman comic, you never read any Superboy comics, you don't know anything about the iterations of Superman before Smallville, then you don't know that Lionel Luthor only exists in that show. He's unique to that show. Chloe Sullivan only exists in that show. Pete Ross being black is only true because of Smallville. And Lana Lang being half Asian. Kristen Krug is Eurasian. She's half Asian. She's Dutch and Chinese. All that's unique to Smallville. See that? So if that's your only exposure to Superman, there's nothing wrong with loving the show and all the different kind of stuff. But don't be talking about who Lana is if you don't know who Lana is from the comics. That version of Lana is unique to Smallville. She doesn't exist anywhere else. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's what happens when you're dealing with a stan of something, or when you're dealing with a cult of directors. A director's cult, they love everything the director does to the point where they worship them. And then they say you can't disagree or dislike anything that they do. Lord have mercy. Okay? I think Killing Joke was the only comic Tim Burton said he read. So that would make sense then if he had Batman drop Joker into chemicals, but that's not originally how it happened. And there's no mention of the Red Hood in Batman 89. None. Okay. Dave T. Keek, every fan needs to go through their finest five seeing new creators bastardize a favorite character. That's when you go from being a fanboy stan to be a true fan. That's an interesting perspective. I depend on my exposure, the stuff that I've read, and then I try to do research. But I agree, it's really going to make you angry once you see what they do to your favorite character, because they will completely just ruin them. That's more in live action than it is in animation. In animation, and I'm talking about Marvel and DC now, but I guess we can include Spawn and other, non-Big Two iterations, and definitely anime. In animation, there tends to be more of an effort by its creators to do justice to the characters. That's definitely true for Earth's Mightiest Heroes, for the Avengers animation. Definitely true for Batman, Superman, Justice League, and all that. It's definitely more true that the effort was put in to make them more true to their comic form. It's not exact, but it's so close it doesn't really matter. See that? But in live action, that's almost always the place where the production team decides to take these incredible liberties and completely change the character and characters, and they strip away the things that made them popular in the first place. And then you're like, for example, that's why I told you never get me started on Smallville. Superman went kicking and screaming into the cape. He did everything he could to fight becoming Superman, and that ain't Superman. Lois Lane is his second choice. He did everything he could to be with Lana. He broke up with Lana because she got infused with kryptonite. Don't get me started on Smallville. Did I tell you not to get me started? In Man of Steel and Batman versus Superman, in Man of Steel, Pa Kent tells Clark Kent, young Clark says, should I have let the bus full of school kids die? Pa Kent says, I don't know, maybe. What? Go back and read the first panel that has the Kents in Superman's first comic. And Ma Kent is the one that says, when you grow up, you have to serve mankind with your powers. And Clark was still a little boy when he said that. So the Kents actually began to feed him the idea of being a hero and helping people from a child. It's either Batman versus Superman. I think it's that one. I think it's Batman versus Superman where Ma Kent says, you don't owe these people anything. She's the one that taught Clark to, and she's the one that made his costume in the comics. In the comics, she made his costume from the blankets he was wrapped in his Kryptonian spaceship. So it's live action that are more often than not going to really mangle the characters, and they love doing it. Animation, not so much, but we almost got Chris Rock as Jimmy Olsen in Tim Burton's Batman. That's right. Eddie Murphy was also almost the Riddler in Batman Forever. That was originally going to be Eddie Murphy. Everybody knows, including Chris Reeve, that Richard Pryor Superman 3 was a mistake. It was a blending of two worlds that didn't need to blend. But they were going to try to do that with Eddie Murphy in Batman Forever and cast him as a Riddler, if you didn't know that. And then Tim Burton's Superman also included Nicolas Cage as Kal-El. Nicolas Cage also named one of his sons Kal-El, just for the record. But when I saw that in the Flash movie, and I finally saw Nick Cage in the Superman, I was like, no, that ain't Superman. Can we say the same for Luthor's sister in Supergirl? Kind of. Yes, on Supergirl, but also in Smallville, Lionel Luthor was very promiscuous. And so he had a lot of bastard children. And so that's how we found out that Tess was actually Lutessa Luthor, Lex's sister. So kind of in Supergirl, but the idea of there being some other Luthors out there kind of started with Smallville. Now I have to go back and do some more comic research to see if that happened in the comics. I do know from the comics that we've seen Lex Luthor from other worlds. Like on Earth 3, Lex Luthor was actually the hero because on Earth 3, all the supes were villains. All the metahumans were villains on Earth 3 because Earth 3 had its morality poles reversed, that evil always won. And so the Lex Luthor, Alexander Luthor from that world was the hero. So kind of in Supergirl, but that's not the first time we've seen other Luthor siblings. Okay. I still want to see that version of Chris Rock as Jimmy Olsen. Well, that would have been something for sure. 30th thing Batman ever did, Superman. This is another thing that tends to happen a lot. You have the heroes being many times cuckolded and many times being humiliated by their fellow team members. So that happened a lot on Smallville. Did I tell you not to get me started on Smallville? Because Lois was with Green Arrow before she got with Superman. And then in the animated series, Bruce and Lois were actually together. Bruce didn't tell Lois that he was Batman. She found out on an adventure when his mask got ripped off. And then she kind of freaked out and they broke up. But Bruce Wayne was with Lois Lane before Superman and Clark got with her in the animated series. And then we have the Big Kahuna. What's the Big Kahuna, y'all? Knows in the comics, Bruce almost married Lois. Yes, but also the one I'm most familiar with is the one on the show. That's what I was referring to. So I have to give me a comics reference on that, if that was like mainstream or if that was Elseworlds or all that. Because if it was like Silver Age, they did some of everything in the Silver Age. But I'm saying the one that sticks out most to me is the one on the animated series. But give me the comics reference from that in the comics so I can check that one out. Because if it was Silver Age, must be a recent comment. I don't know. Because, they had, in Silver Age, they had Lois Lane become a Black woman for 24 hours. That was the whole thing. So, yeah, but they have the heroes hooking up with each other a lot. But that does happen in the comics, too, because I found out a Black Canary hooked up with Batman in the comics. So this tends to be a thing, and it's not my thing. It's distasteful to me. I don't like it. I never have liked it. But what's the Big Kahuna? What's the Big Kahuna? What's the Big? Say, you know what the Big Kahuna is. Say it with me. Bruce and Barbara. Okay, never mind. It was a canon happened in Earth 89. Yeah, I thought it had to be some kind of Elseworlds or some type of multiverse thing, because the only thing, like I said, I knew for sure was on the animated series. But The big kahuna is Bruce Wayne and Barbara Gordon, Lord have mercy. I need to do a whole live stream on them because they actually do have a history. But the history of Batman and Batgirl in the comics was when Batgirl was closer to Bruce's age. Bruce Timm, see, they reduced Barbara to be closer to Grayson's age in the comics. And then Bruce Timm took it to where after Barbara broke up with Grayson, Grayson left to become Nightwing, left to go to college, left to try to kind of find his own way as an adventurer. And Barbara stayed and became Bruce's lover. Bruce Timm seems obsessed with that storyline. And I'm like, does anybody, not Barbara in the comics, closer to Bruce's age, not Yvonne Craig's Batgirl, closer to Bruce's age in Batman 66, but Batman, 30s, maybe late 30s, early 40s, and Barbara, same age as Grayson, and then they become a couple. Does anybody really like that? That happened in Batman Beyond and The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke, the movie, not the comic. In the comic, that was just about the Joker crippling Barbara one bad day. The Killing Joke was basically about the origin of the Joker, but in the animated movie, they hooked up. And everybody was like, why? Why? To this day, people are still like, why? Why is Bruce Timm obsessed with Bruce Wayne being with Barbara Gordon? And then they did a spin-off comic where Bruce actually got Barbara pregnant. I told you I didn't need to do a whole live stream with them. If you're not familiar with them, there probably needs to be a whole live stream. But yeah, he got her pregnant in the comic. So maybe I'll do a live stream about that one time. Who can always tell when the writer has a personal fetish for a character? Grant Morrison with Cyclops and White Queen, Jim Lee with Cyclops and Agent Psylocke, Batgirl and Batman. Yeah. By who, I'm assuming you mean we can always tell when the writer has a personal fetish for a character, yeah. Because Morrison was obsessed with Scott and Emma. I never understood Scott and Emma, and then when you put them in the hands of Joss Whedon, you know what's going to happen. If you put anything in Whedon's hands, it's going to be character destroying because that's what he does. So Scott and Emma never vibe with me. I never vibe with that relationship. So I'm a staunch Scott and Jean person. Cyclops and Agent Psylocke. Now, Psylocke is an interesting character. She's 3 characters in one. Psylocke has a convoluted history. It's not quite as convoluted as the Hawks, but it's like that. Because Psylocke is a bunch of different personalities all in the same person that got merged based on the history you believe, and then they got separated. And then that's another one we could do a whole live stream on. Psylocke's really, really interesting. And Batgirl and Batman. So yeah, so we know that when the writers kind of hug them on something, like the current editor-in-chief of Spider-Man does not want Spider-Man with Mary Jane. Why? Their most popular Spider-Man selling title is when Peter and Mary Jane are married with a kid. That's the one that sells the most. And he says we can't have that because it ages the character. So when you have a production team that has like these personal vendettas, that they're more interested in serving their concepts, their ideas, their vision than the character itself. Like I said, that happens most often in live action, but it does happen in the comics. Because I'm so glad that Sin's past was retconned, I don't know what to do. And it does happen, and it does happen in animation. But live action is the one where most of the time you're going to see them completely mangle the character and just make them go in this whole different direction that isn't anything we know at all. Okay. All right, that's it for me today. I wanted to pop on and do my live stream. Thanks so much to everybody that joined me live. Thanks for your comments. I appreciate your comments. Please like and share this video. And I'm relaunching a new comic So I'm going to need your help. I'll let you know when that gets officially underway. So I'm definitely going to need your help with that because I'm trying to get my company my comics company, Nucleus Comics, to the next level because I have so much stuff I want to do. Thanks to those of you, again, that came to watch me live. And those of you that are watching this on replay, be sure to leave some comments because that helps the channel, helps the algorithm. All right. So I will see you same time next week, and we'll be chatting it up. We'll be chopping it up on what's going on in comics this week. DT2 Comics Chat out.